Welcome to Off the Shelf, where we take you on the most spectacular adventures, talk about salacious romances, dive deep into the latest true crime, and break down the most anticipated memoirs. Hey, y'all, welcome back to Off the Shelf. On today's episode, we have a very cool author who goes by the alias of Rektok Ross, which we're definitely going to chat about today. And she is the author of the latest psychological YA thriller, Summer Rental, which we cannot wait to chat about. Welcome, Liani, which is her real name, to Off the Shelf.
Okay, first of all, you're awesome. I have to give you like tons of kudos because you've got both my real name and my hard to pronounce name as well. You got both of them perfect. So that's awesome. I appreciate that. You obviously did your research. It's so great to be here. I'm so happy to connect with you guys and chat more about just books and film and TV and all the fun stuff.
Absolutely. Okay, but first and foremost, we want to briefly talk about like you. Tell us a little bit about you. I mean, you have such an interesting life between your law degree and that career and then being an author, and you're very open about both. We had just
Yeah.
spoken to an author who I didn't even realize was some sort of chemical engineer in her past life, and I was
Oh my
like,
God.
what? So yes, briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try and make it short. So I grew up in Florida. So I'm a Florida girl, though now I'm in California and Vegas. I always loved like film, TV, storytelling. I used to write stories as a little kid, like even in elementary school in my little notepad. But I came from like a background, we didn't have a lot of money. My mom was a school teacher, my dad didn't have a job, and my parents were always kind of like pushing me to like get a real job. And I just always had in the back of my head that I was kind of going to be on my own financially after high school. And so as much as I would have loved to, go get an English degree or go to film school or something, it really wasn't in the cards for me back then. It's so funny because I think of now, like when I grew up now, I feel like this generation has so many more opportunities, which is really amazing. But back then it was like you went to school. That was like the thing.
Mhm.
And so I went to University of Florida, go Gators. And then my mom always kind of encouraged me. She thought law school would be a really good fit for me. She thought it'd be, obviously good pay, but also I would get to use my writing skills. And I was kind of like a theater geek also growing up. So she was like, okay, you can't do theater because it's not going to pay the bills, but like you can kind of act, on the stand or whatever. Or like as you're doing your opening and closing, like you can act. So it sounded good to me too. I went to law school in Miami. I actually graduated college early. Law school, I was kind of like the youngest person at my law firm, which has kind of like I could talk forever about being a woman in law and like being a young woman in law because there's a lot of things there as well that is just very interesting to unpack. But in the to be brief for the intro, I practiced at a really amazing law firm. I had a great experience. I was in Dallas for a couple of years, and then they moved me out to Silicon Valley to help start their litigation section. So I was a trial attorney, like the kind of attorney that you see on TV. I also did most of my clients were big, like corporate, complex litigation stuff. My first case was actually Enron, which now it's being aged a little bit, but like back in the day, it was like the biggest bankruptcy that had ever existed. So that was really cool. All of my cases were kind of like New York Times headlined. It was like as sexy as you can get for law, which inherently isn't that sexy. But the job was really cool. It was super, lots of crazy hours, lots of hard work, but I really did enjoy it. But there was always like something in the back of my head that was really pushing me more towards a creative like lifestyle. And I remember I was like a third or fourth year when I finally was able to like breathe a little bit. Because your first couple of years as a lawyer, you don't have time to do anything but work. But I finally got like a little bit of breathing time and I realized how much I missed being creative. And I asked permission from the powers that be, could I write on the side? Because they really, at least at a law firm where the kind of law firm where I worked, they kind of like own you to a degree, your time and everything. And they were really amazing. I feel really blessed. I was at such a wonderful place for so long. And they said, yeah, sure, go ahead. As long as you're making like your billable hours and it doesn't affect anything, you can write. And so I took night classes at SMU. I took about 2 years kind of like learning the craft of writing. And then I put out a self-published book. And I really loved the experience. Self-publishing was not what it is today. It was so long ago, and there was like no way to market your books or like for people to read it. But I loved the whole process. And I guess like I was bit by the bug then. And then I just started taking more time writing. I went on, like, they call it flex time, so limited hours at my firm. And that's when I worked on Ski Weekend, which was my debut thriller. And yeah, I ultimately quit my job, and now I am writing full time and doing the film and TV thing like you guys are as well. So I really love it. I'm very grateful for the law background and a lot of the skill set I learned and the experience and being able to save the money, which definitely helps right now being a creative, because that's a really hard career to make money on. But I feel really good about where I am and like making the switch and moving to a creative life.
I love that so much because I can relate completely 100% in life. Gosh, I can't say go Gators, but I can say go Tigers because I went to LSU.
Ooh, SEC. I love it. I love it.
No, but I went to school. I actually started like in law freshman year, and like at orientation, I was like, I don't know if this is what I want to do. I was like, I want to help people, but I don't know if I want to help in this way. And in press and in interviews that I've done, in years prior, I always say that what really drew me to it was Legally Blonde.
I mean,
as,
everyone.
as silly as that seems, it was that dynamic of like girls can do this too, and like
Yes.
be pink and sassy, but be strong and independent, and bold. And then just little things that kept happening in life made me realize, wait, I don't want to do any of this. I want to create is really what it is. You know what I mean? I'm like, I want to be too many things. Because at one point I wanted to be a doctor, and then I settled for nutrition to where I was like, okay, I can still help people. I can still be in that hospital setting.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I can't do this. And a really good friend of mine, at the time, she was one of my sorority sisters, was a theater major. And I was like, you can make a living doing that? Like exactly what our parents say, like, no way. But it bit me there. And so I actually started taking classes off campus. And then that led to where I am now.
That's so cool.
Long story short. But yes, I can completely relate to just wanting to have something solid, especially coming from the South. That's kind of the mentality you have for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But this creative life has definitely opened doors that like I could have only dreamed of. So kudos to you
100%.
too for
No, it's so funny that we have so much in common. But yes, I just, in a way, I'm like kind of jealous of this generation, because I feel like they can go out and just live their genuine, authentic life, because there's so many doors open now. We can talk about this too. We get into like self-publishing or entrepreneurship, but the way that social media has really changed things, it's been a complete game changer for anyone who's a creative, because now you don't need like the gatekeepers or anyone else. You can really go out, do the content yourself, and give it, shoot it off directly to your audience, and you can make a living. And people are making amazing money and doing great things. But it was not like, for anyone listening who's young, like it was not like that. When I was growing up, at least we were lucky that I was kind of like almost one of the first female generations where you could go off and be a lawyer and be a doctor and all of that. But because of that, everyone was so gung-ho, like girl power, like go be a businesswoman, go be a lawyer, go be a doctor. And there wasn't like go be an artist or go be a creative. Like that just wasn't, unless you were very wealthy, like
yes.
or like a trust fund or whatever, then you could do that. But for anyone else, it was like, it was cool, but it was like you had to go get like this real job. And
Yeah, I always called it, I was like, these people are the chosen ones. I was
yeah,
like, there's no way I can do this. Like this is not even a world. That's so funny. That's
I interned. It was
so accurate.
my last year in law school, and this was an amazing experience. And I'm still like in touch with all these people. I interned at, it's funny now to say this, but it was at Miramax, which obviously now has had so much drama with like Harvey and all the stuff that happened there. But I was like really young in my 20s, my last year in law school. and I was in the business department and business and legal, and I absolutely loved it. Like, I loved the people I worked with. I thought it was so fun. Like, a lot of my work was, reviewing, like actor contracts, and like it was huge names, and they were doing Kill Bill at the time, and I was like looking at all this stuff for Kill Bill, and answering phones, and it was like some huge celebrity on the call, and all that was so exciting and intriguing. But when I talked to my bosses and I was like, okay, well, if I don't go to a big law firm, like, what's the starting pay? And they're like, oh, like $20,000. It's like, yeah, there's no way. Like, I can't, having no money, like I can't. And I had loans at that point too, right? I've been in law school for 3 years. I'm like, this is just not, for me, this is not a viable like avenue. And so they all they also encouraged me, like, why don't you go to the big, because I had a great big law firm job offer. They said, go do that for a few years, save your money, and then if this is still something you want, come back. But I never did come back. I got the corporate lifestyle it's hard once you're in there. They call it like the golden handcuffs, because you're making so much money, and they make it really enticing. It's hard to leave. But I did a little bit dabble in, like, maybe I'll do entertainment law or whatever, but going straight into a film studio, like you're saying, that is like the chosen one. Like, you have to have either you have to have family money, you have to be willing to live in like a rat infested apartment eating peanut butter and jelly for 10 years, because there's no other way. That it's not like a salary you could live on.
100%. 100%. I could not agree more. Okay, so I feel like everybody has this question, and I didn't want to do all this digging and like not just ask you directly, but why this alias, Rektok Ross?
Yeah, so it's funny because this dates back to the law firm days. So when they gave me like the thumbs up, the agreement was, but I had to write under like a name that wasn't my name, because they were a little bit concerned that, and rightfully so, that my corporate clients might be like, well, how does Liani have time to write this book when she's supposed to be on this case? And even though I think my coworkers would vouch for me, I was an incredible hard worker. I mean, I was the one who answered the phone in the office at midnight on a Friday when everyone else would kind of run away. So it's not that like anyone thought I was a slacker. However, the appearance to your clients at a place like I worked always has to be, 100% top notch. And so they were a little worried that if it got out that I was, especially writing like young adult, and that first book was like a romance. Like, I don't know, like we don't know if we want like our, one of our top associates, publishing books, and then people know that it's like, why are you doing that? Why are you not 100% on our cases? Even though I was doing it at like 4 a.m. So that was kind of the agreement we reached. And the name, it was kind of funny. I was home for Thanksgiving with my brother and my dad, and my mom passed away when I was in law school, and she's the one who like always instilled a love of reading and writing in me. And her last name was Ross, her maiden name. And so when we were kicking around names, I was like, well, I really want Ross, because I want to like pay that homage to my mom, who, really is the one who kind of was like the driver of creativity in me. And then I was like, but I can't leave my dad out. And my dad's last name is Kotcher. And so we just like inverted Kotcher.
Okay.
Rektok, like it's just backwards. And there's one letter switched around. And so it was like kind of a joke at first with my brother, but then it stuck, and I liked it because I think it's getting a lot better being a female author, but there's always been a little bit of, especially in horror, psychological thrillers different. There are more women in psychological thriller, but there's not a lot of women in horror. And I knew I kind of wanted to do a little bit of both. And I thought, well, let's just do a name that you can't really tell. Maybe it's masculine. I don't know. It's definitely not 100% feminine. And I thought it was like a good idea to do a pen name that you couldn't tell gender. And also you can't really tell nationality either, because it's kind of just a weird name. I didn't want people to have preconceived notions. I've since I left law and everything, I've since like come out, and now everyone knows it's me. And I it's so funny too. Like I was on Instagram, like before Instagram was even like a big thing. And I was kind of like similar to what you did. Like I didn't have a book club, but I was always posting and sharing books, but I never showed my face because I had to have this pen name, and like no one could know who I was. And so I have people that I've been like friends with on Instagram, like book bloggers or bookstagrammers, like since 2000 and something, that when I came out, like, it was funny because they finally could like put a face to whatever, but they all now are like, I remember when you never showed, like, all you showed was like your hand, like it was like this, like all my pictures were like this. Like,
Oh,
people listening, I'm holding a book up to my face, like you can't see my face. Like all my pictures were like books, or like I was covering my face with a book. So it's funny, like I love the people that I started with and kind of like grew through social media with, because they all laugh that, now I'm totally out there and you see me all the time and I'm doing TikTok and videos. But back then it's like no one really knew who I was. It was just like the
fun
face.
though. Yeah, but I think that's so fun because then, like, because who we think or we start to assume this author is, and then we see you, it is so completely different. And it really goes with the saying, like, never judge a book by its cover.
Love it. Yeah.
You are so bright and on your socials, you know what I mean? And lively. And these books are so deep and
Can be a
dark.
little dark. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
actually hilarious. I was in the Horror Writers Association. I was at their booth about a year ago at the LA Times Book Festival. I was speaking on stage and I went to the booth to kind of meet everyone and hang out. And I'm in like, so for people listening who can't see, like, I mean, I have blonde hair. Like, I kind of, like, people joke like the Elle Woods thing a little bit, but like I have blonde hair, I wear a lot of pink, like the blue eyes, all that kind of stuff. And I show up with like pink lipstick and a sunflower dress, and I'm working at the horror booth, and everyone else next to me is like completely goth. And everyone who came up is like, are you in the wrong booth? I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, I write horror too. This is where I am, or horror thriller. So it's funny. It's like you can never judge a book by the cover. And that's also, so I know we're going to talk mostly about Summer Rental, but Ski Weekend, my first book, that was like one of the main messages I wanted to get out. And like you said, there's a lot of like deep, dark themes, or I don't know if they're necessarily dark, but they're definitely deep. Mm-hmm. And in Ski Weekend, which was my first thriller, it's like The Breakfast Club meets Alive. And I really wanted to explore stereotypes, because I feel like my whole life I've been kind of stereotyped or pigeonholed. Like I said, like coming out as a young, blonde, wears pink attorney. Mm-hmm. Back before, I think I was even like right around Elle Woods, or back before it was even cool, I had a lot of people who prejudged me. Mm-hmm. Men would ask me for coffee, assume I was the paralegal. The secretaries didn't like me because they didn't want like a young female. They wanted like the male attorneys. There was so much going on. And I just felt like, why can't anyone just get to know me? Like, if you get to know me, you'll see I'm super capable. Like, I'm intelligent. I can do all of this. I don't have to get your coffee. Like, so I think just kind of having all of that in my life and then watching it happen to other people too. Yeah. That was like such an important thing. I really, really wanted to write about that. Yeah. And that was kind of like the genesis of the first book, was like, let's, exactly what you said, like, don't judge a book by its cover. Let's take these stereotypes and let's really unpack them. Mm-hmm. And let's get to know people for who they really are. Summer Rental is like a totally different message, but I always want to explore in my writing. And a lot of it is kind of dark. Like, there's a lot of death. But I love like Jordan Peele and how he's always exploring like social commentary and things as a society that we do and maybe we shouldn't do. And I always want that in my writing as well. Like, I love exploring those deeper meanings in books.
Absolutely. And I mean, I could go on about this topic that you're talking about, stereotype women, ethnicity, all this stuff that I've definitely seen. That being from the South, you would think I had experienced a lot of it, and I hadn't. I was quite sheltered and protected from it. And then when I went to LA, I felt very exposed to a lot of like judgment and stereotype. And I was like, oh, this is odd. So I definitely, I feel like that's like a whole other like video topic. Because there's so much to that, but I completely agree. And I think that that's so spot on. But speaking of Summer Rental, briefly tell us what Summer Rental is about.
Yeah, so Summer Rental is basically Mean Girls meet Scream. So it's a group of mean girls, like bitchy friends. They're, I would say, even more frenemies. And the main character, Riley, she's a transplant to this really posh new school. She, unlike the rest of her friends, is not wealthy like they are, and she's hiding it, and she's hiding herself, which I think a lot of us do, especially growing up in high school, junior high, and college. But even as grown women, I know there's many times even I, as a woman in my 40s, sometimes will dim a little bit who I am or hide a little bit of things of who I am to kind of blend and fit in with the people I'm around. And so she's kind of doing that on a much bigger scale because she's in high school. And there's this whole other like mystery going on of one of the girls that in the group that had died a year before. And two of their friends disappear on the first night, and they're trying to find where their two friends are as a hurricane rolls in, and then people start getting killed. The body count starts finding everyone starts getting killed.
And I always tell Nicole this. I'm like, I am, because she had brought this book to my attention, and I was like, oh God, I'm so scared. I was like, I'm so scared to read this.
Yeah.
But thrillers have really become my thing this year, I feel. And I find that they're so interesting because there's such depth, specifically always in that main character, that there is so much internal like turmoil going on, and it's always something more than just what somebody's just like, oh, it's just this little silly story about this. There has been so much beautiful depth in these characters, so I just get sucked in, and I'm like, okay, definitely can't read these at night. However, I am like flying when I do, and it's absolutely so thrilling, like literally, and fun. And I'm, for somebody who doesn't like being scared, I absolutely love Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios. And that was something that like kind of happened randomly. But that's kind of how you feel. It's that like sudden jolt of excitement with these stories. And I thought that you like set it up so perfectly that when you had that plot twist, I was shook. I was like, no.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Well, you know what? I don't want to give it away, but definitely play a little bit with stereotype. So when people get to the end, I think that's part of the shock too, because we're stereotyped to think one way, and then you're like, oh wait, what's okay? That's crazy with the ending, because it's not what you think. It's not how you think it should end. But I love that you're saying that you are gravitating more towards thriller. You're not necessarily a thriller or a horror person. And I always say, like, when we talk about brand and marketing, like, I feel very strongly that my brand really is like, it's like thriller adjacent to horror. And it's really for people that think that they don't like horror or think that they can't do thrillers. I love the genre. I love to play in it because I think it's a really safe space to explore deeper, like I said, like deeper themes in society, deeper fears that we have. But there's something about doing it in a horror or a thriller landscape that's not as threatening as doing it in like I like a literary fiction or something where it's more in your face. This is less in your face, and especially the stuff I write has a lot of vein of like satire and comedy as well, that you don't necessarily, unless you want to think about it, you don't necessarily have to think about the deeper lesson or the deeper meaning. But the people who want to, it's there for them. And I think that's like the fun thing about horror, is you can unpack these really complex ideas and themes about society and the way that we think as people, and our deep fears and whatever, but you do it in a really palatable way. That's why I think people, like, I'll say Jordan Peele again because I'm a huge fan of his, but I think that's why movies like Get Out that he's done have really resonated so well with people, because that movie in particular, it's not so in your face, right? Like, you can appreciate it on two levels. If you just like thriller or horror or even just action, you can really watch that movie and just have a really good fun time with it, and laugh and be a little bit scared, and be worried about the characters, and you can leave the theater just thinking, I saw a really fun movie and I was fully entertained for the 90 minutes. But if you're like a thinking person, you can watch it and you can really unpack like what he's really trying to say about race and society. And there's so many like really interesting themes in that movie. And it's there, but it's like not so in your face because he does it in such a fun, like accessible way. And that's what I love. That's like what I really want to be doing as well as a creative, is like writing those super entertaining escapism stories. But I have a lot of thoughts on the world and society, and I want to also be able to say those things too. And hopefully people listen to them or hear them.
No, absolutely. And I guess like in that case, I definitely am more of like a thinking person. And I think it comes down to, being an actor, that I do have to unpack characters in order for them to make sense to me, for me to be able to develop them well, and then be able to therefore, put that character and on screen in one way or another. But what you're saying about thrillers, I find so interesting, because that was kind of the topic of the next question, which is what gets your heart pumping with him, this being your second thriller now. But I know you said that the very first book you ever wrote was a romance. So
Yeah.
was it always intentional to make that switch, because this just was that place where you were like, I have the freedom, I can tell truth, but still, like you said, not put it in your face type of thing? Like it's a little bit for everyone. Was that kind of more the intention? Do you think you'll write romance, or is this kind of the avenue that you want to stick with?
It's so funny because I'm such a weirdo. I love romance and like romantic fantasy, and I love horror and thriller. So I don't know that I think there are a decent amount of people like that,
Yeah.
but I think for me personally, I always struggle. Like my husband will make so much fun of me because I'll be watching The Summer I Turned Pretty, right? Like quintessential teeny bopper. I'm way too old to be watching that, but I don't care because I love it and I read all the books, or I'll be watching Twilight, like something that is like so teeny romance, or like the great 90s things like Can't Hardly Wait or Legally Blonde, and then the next minute I'll be watching like The Exorcist or Scream or whatever. Like I have such a dichotomy of like I love both so much, and romantic fantasy as well. Like I like to say like a little pat on my back, but like I was reading ACOTAR before everyone else on TikTok. Like I was watching urban fantasy or like reading urban fantasy like 15 years ago before it was even a thing. I love like the angst, and I think it is actually. Now that I'm saying this in my head, I know I've thought this before. It's like the high stakes. That's what I love. It's the emotion and the high stakes, and you have it both in romance, especially YA or teen romance, where it's the first love, because the first love feels like the most important thing in the world when it's the first time you've ever experienced it. And so it's so high stakes. Is this person going to love you back? Like, do they love someone else? Is this going to work out? Are they the one? Are they the soulmate? It's like the highest stake thing in the world if you're a 16-year-old, girl or a boy.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with a thriller or a horror. Are you going to live or you're going to die? Like the stakes are also equally as high. So I think for me, I love both equally. I love the high stakes. There wasn't like a concerted thought in going from, so my first book is called Prodigal. I'm going to update it and republish it because I love that book so much. And it just didn't find a readership because I put it out in 2012 when there was no one was really self-publishing. There wasn't Amazon ads, there wasn't Facebook ads, there was no social media. Like there was no way other than your immediate family, really. Like Colleen Hoover, I think, came out with her first book like a couple months later or something, like, and she didn't even take off until years later. There just wasn't, you couldn't do anything in self-publishing like you do now. But that book, like I loved that book and I loved the story, and that's the story I wanted to tell at that moment in time. I don't think I like thought like it wasn't strategic, like, okay, now I want to do thriller horror. It was like I had the idea for Ski Weekend and I couldn't let go of it. And I basically like I was watching a real show on, I think it was like Dateline or 2020 or something. And I always loved these survival stories. And I saw this story, this family that got stranded in the mountains, and it was so tragic and so sad. And it like didn't leave my soul. Like I couldn't stop thinking about it and what I would have done in this situation, and how we get so used to all of our like creature comforts in life because we live in such a modern era that we don't really think about things anymore. Like we're not worried about nature. We have our cell phone, we have our cars, we have our heater, whatever. But at any moment in time, that can all be stripped away. And you can literally be in the wilderness fighting for your life. And that didn't leave me. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I knew I had to write the book. And then once I wrote Ski Weekend, everyone was like, okay, well, and it hit, like it did really well. Everyone was like, okay, well, you got to stick with thriller. Because that was, and it still is the mindset of a lot of people say, especially in traditional publishing, once you get one big book, you need to stay in that same genre because you're building your readership. And a lot of readers won't, if you only have one book, are not going to immediately go to like, oh, now you're doing fantasy or something. Even like a Stephen King or even Colleen Hoover or, all the big names, like they wrote in their genre for a while. Stephen King wrote horror before he wrote Shawshank Redemption, and so that's why I was like, okay, well, I got to write a thriller. it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I didn't want to write romance anymore. And I actually am writing romantic fantasy right now. That's like a little side story that I'm putting out, like a short story for Halloween. But yeah, it wasn't like that strategic until Summer Rental. That was very strategic.
Okay, well that makes perfect sense. And yes, I agree with you because I do think Colleen Hoover, if you look at her books, she kind of stuck to a genre for a while and then she like really stood up on us with Verity and you were like, "Whoa, girl, what just happened?" But it was so good and it was
So good.
so enticing and you wanted to read more, but and then, same with Layla, which I read. It was very different in a massive switch and then then she goes to It Ends With Us and all that stuff, so
Yeah.
it makes sense now. She's big, she can do whatever she wants.
Yep. People are gonna follow her because they love her.
Exactly. And okay, but that's so exciting. I'm excited that you're going to write other books and do other things, and I absolutely love that. So but with that, I guess the question comes in, your books give nods to like OG classics,
Yeah. Yeah.
The Breakfast Club, like you said, Mean Girls and Scream. Is that intentional? Is that something that just happens while you're developing it? What is that? What is that that's going on?
So that's super intentional.
Okay.
I'm I'm a big, like I said, I mean, I think, and now I'm kind of gravitating towards film and TV and screenwriting. I think you could have like tossed a coin and I could have either been, an author right away or film and TV screenwriter and producer. Like I love both. I love books. I mean, you can see behind me. This is just like one of my libraries. I have like four. I love books so much, but I also am so passionate about film and TV. So I think for me, it's very intentional. Like when I write books, in my mind, they look like movies or TV. I think very much like I plot like Save the Cat, which is a traditional film plotting device. I do beats exactly like screenwriters do, and my brain just works like I think of film and TV when I'm writing. And so it very much influences. I think when I first was like, oh, ski weekend, is it going to be the Breakfast Club? I don't think I thought that right away, but a lot of the inside jokes 100% were like references from action adventure things that I had seen growing up as a kid. And then the same thing with Summer Rental. I mean, I could talk to you forever about slashers. I love slashers. I think that subgenre is so awesome. I'm the biggest, I could geek out of it forever. And especially for me, Scream was life changing. That came out when I was in high school, and that like changed the way that people looked at horror movies. And so I think I just always knew I would write a slasher. I loved all the other ones too. I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street was formative for me as a little kid. Friday the 13th, Sleepaway Camp. Like I love these so much. I knew I was going to write a slasher one day. And there's 100% like all of the movies I love, all the little inside jokes. Like I Know What You Did Last Summer. That's all baked into Summer Rental, because for me, Summer Rental is like my homage to those amazing slashers I grew up watching in the 80s and the 90s. So that part's super intentional. I mean, whether or not when we did like the actual blurb, like Ski Weekend is Breakfast Club meets Alive and Summer Rental is Mean Girls Meet Scream, I don't know that I was necessarily thinking those two movies as I was writing per se, but all the content for sure was very intentional, like the references and the Easter eggs.
I love that. I love that so much. So I did want to touch on, like very briefly, because I break things down in this way. Specifically, Summer Rental definitely touches on bullying and toxic female friendships. Is this kind of based on experience? And I know a lot of writers write based on experience. It's like, I went through this, I wanted to kind of just like unpack this for myself. It's very therapeutic. Was this like this for you? Or again, is it just something that kind of like develops organically as you write?
So 100% really similar to Ski Weekend, where I felt really passionate about stereotypes and the way I'd been stereotyped, the way I saw other people stereotyped. Summer Rental was super personal for me about female bullying and toxic relationships. And I feel like we don't talk about it, which is crazy to me. And we talk a lot about bullying, strangers bullying you, kids that don't like you bullying you, but we don't really talk about like women in your own friendship circle bullying you. And to me, not that one's worse than the other, but that is just so extremely painful. But it's also really embarrassing. And I think that's why maybe we don't talk about it, or maybe that's why people don't want to admit that it's happening, because it seems really embarrassing that you have these people that actually know you super well and then decide they don't like you, or they hate you for some reason and they were like your best friend. So that feels more like, and no one wants to say I don't have any friends, right? Like I had friends and now I have no friends. Like, especially for a young girl, that's a really scary and humiliating thing to admit to. And what's crazy to me is this happened to me when I was in high school. I had like my group of my best friends, they all kind of turned on me. Like I didn't do anything, but I feel like everyone says that. There was something that happened, like an incident, and they all just like turned on me because their parents made them. And within, a day, I all of a sudden had no friends. Went from having like three best friends to having no friends. And it was so traumatic. And I remember like crying in my room all the time. And I wouldn't tell my parents and I wouldn't tell my brother because it was embarrassing. Who wants to say, like, oh, I don't have friends anymore? And it really scarred me for life, because now I have so many friends, because I realize like I don't ever want to just depend on two or three people, because if anything happens, then you have no one. So it's really impacted like the way that I live my life now. And I feel like even now when I meet new people, can be a little like, I don't know if suspicious is the right word, but maybe paranoid, or I just go into every friendship different now. So it really impacted me. And I never really talked about it because it's just, I don't know, it's not something that you talk about. And then I have two stepdaughters. And this is when it kind of all came full circle and brought all of those feelings back. They're both beautiful, like inside and out, wonderful, amazing kids. And they both separately had the same thing happen to them, where their little core friend group, they're like three or four best friends, all just turned on them. And like I had to watch them go through the same thing that I went through. And it was even harder watching them because you can't fix it. Right. Yeah. And you just watch like how heartbreaking it is for them and how devastating it is to go through that. And again, we don't talk about it. So no one discusses how awful this is. And like they wouldn't eat, they couldn't sleep, they weren't showering. I mean, it was so horrible for them. And there was nothing I could do. And I remember thinking like, man, I want to talk about this. Like I want people to realize, because their friends that did this to them, and the same as mine, we're not bad people. Like they're not horrible, evil girls. They just decided they didn't want to be friends and wanted to like kind of poke at them. Like there's something about women, I don't know what it is, but it's like we can be really nasty even though we're not nasty people. Yeah. And I think part of it is too, like they didn't see the effect it had on my girls, just like my friends didn't see me home alone crying, unable to get out of bed. And I really thought like, these are nice girls. Like if they could actually see what I'm seeing, they would change their behavior. And it all kind of boiled, like I just knew I wanted to write about this. I knew I wanted to talk about it. But again, like with horror and thriller, I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't so in your face. Yeah. It was more like, okay, well, let's have a bunch of mean, girls that are mean to each other, and like, let's start killing them. Because they're like not nice. And like, maybe if you'd been nice, someone wasn't going to like start killing you. But so it's kind of in like a tongue-in-cheek comical way. But really, I hope that what people get from Summer Rental, the ones that choose to go deeper, is like this dynamic of like, I don't know why men don't really do this to each other. I don't know why we do, but we do it, and we do it at all levels, and we do it at all ages. And I remember like one of like the most poignant moments for me when I was telling people about this book and wanting to write it. I was on a call with a bunch of older women, fully grown, mature women, and they were telling me about stuff that had happened to them that year with like their adult, 30, 40, 50-year-old women, about their friends that like just stopped talking to them or turned on them. And it just made me really think like, this is something we need to talk about. We don't talk about it. And like, you don't have to be friends with everyone, but you don't have to be cruel. There's other ways that you can handle situations. And I think if we talked about it more, and I think if we really saw the damage that we were doing to people, like emotionally and even physically, I really believe that most people are nice and wouldn't act like that if they could actually see what it was doing to those people.
I feel like you just like preached to the choir. I I had a very similar experience in grade school, and then it happened like senior year in high school. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like what you're saying. You're like, I have no idea what I did. I have
Yeah.
no idea, not a clue. Like, I'm like, I don't know why I was a target. And it is one of those things that you look back and you're just like, this person is a decent person. I don't know what happened then, but
Yeah.
it absolutely scarred me. It's absolutely something that I brought on in therapy, brought out in therapy very early on because I just couldn't let it go.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm living my life, but like this just follows me in this weird, like it's like this little tiny dark cloud that just like follows you forever.
Yeah.
And kind of like what you were saying, you approach things differently now. I definitely am way more protective
Yeah.
now. I almost, I hate to say this, but I feel like at times, and this isn't who I always was. I have a massive personality and I'm so trusting. But these experiences, it's like walls just started to build, because it's just like I don't trust you. I don't know how to trust you right away. So I keep a very intimate group that I can trust, but yeah, like and it's sad and I don't know, it triggered me personally. I'm like, trigger warning on everything I put for summer rental. But I'm like, it triggered me. So I'm like, I can't imagine how a young girl who's probably going through this
Yeah.
right now, like just literally saw herself in this and was like, hold on, there's another side to this, like I'm gonna come out of this on the other side.
That's
But
what also I love that you said, because that's the thing that was important to me. I wanted girls reading this, and this is what I tried to teach my girls too. Like, this is not forever, and like it's not you. Like, there's nothing wrong with you that
right,
made them do this. It's not about you, it's about them. And like
right,
you're totally normal. And this happened to me. Like I never talked about, but I was really open with them about how I went through the same thing because I didn't want them to feel isolated. I wanted them to know that like this happens to it's happened to almost every woman I know.
yeah,
Like it's not about you. And they thought that it was them. They thought that there was something wrong with them as a person. And like that's so traumatic. But that's also what and I'm so glad that you said it, because that's what I wanted people to get out of this book, that like this isn't isolated. It's not just you. It's not like you're a terrible person. This happens to all happens to all women. I don't know why. It's awful that it happens. And the other thing I was gonna say, what's so interesting to me is you and I had the same experience. And it's like it was so I loved hearing what you said, because you went the opposite way. Like you made a really small group of friends because you don't trust anyone. And I made a huge group of friends because I don't trust anyone. Because I think at any point in time, like any one of those people, even my best friend, can just decide that they don't want to be my friend anymore. So I need to have like 100 of them, because but it's funny because you went the complete opposite way. But it's like how both of us having the same trauma, but have like reacted differently in our lives to kind of protect ourselves from it happening again.
yeah, but yours makes total sense. Like to me, that makes total sense. It's like, why not keep more to make sure that like if one goes, I still have, I still
Yeah.
have you here, in
Yeah.
my pocket. No, that makes complete sense to me. And yeah, we definitely all just deal with it in different ways, which I think that's the beautiful thing about life and, who we are as individuals. But yeah, it doesn't last forever. It's not an individual experience. We're all going through it. Like you said, I don't understand it, like why it keeps happening. I think it is something that needs to be explored outwardly, like we talk about other mental health issues. I think this is something that like kind of people are like, oh, it's just girls being girls, and it's
Just
like,
girls being girls. Oh, go find new friends. You'll be fine.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and probably, I mean, not to
yeah,
get too into patriarchy, but probably, I mean, it doesn't really happen to guys. Like, I have a son,
right. It doesn't.
it doesn't, my brother never went through this. So, like, I have to say, like, I bet part of it is it's a it's a women's issue. So, like,
Yeah,
that's probably why we don't explore it as much as we explore other things, because it happens to women. And, not to go Taylor Swift on you, but like I feel like we don't really give the attention to things that happen, like just female experiences,
yeah,
as much as what happens to both sexes. But
yeah,
I don't know, like it was my own thing. Like I just felt really passionately. I
yeah,
really knew I wanted to do a slasher, and I really, really, really wanted to talk about this dynamic that women have at all ages, and that I really wanted, my ideal thing would be like a young girl going through this like I was, at 16 to pick this up and be like, okay, like I'm not alone. Like this happens to everyone. Like this is a normal thing and it's not me. And I'm gonna get over it and I'm gonna be okay.
Absolutely.
Serial killer, I'm probably gonna survive the serial killer because I'm a person, you know?
No, and I thought the dynamic that you created in this story was just, it was chef's kiss. It was so perfect. It wasn't too much of anything. It really married so well. So, okay, last question. I know that you're writing a short story right now, but is there another book in the horizon?
Yes.
Can we talk about it? Can you say anything? If not, it's okay.
Yeah, so real quick, so I'm writing a short story that's gonna come out for Halloween. It's called The Pop Star and the Devil. And of course, there's another theme. I just have all these thoughts. I mean, I don't know. I'm like one of these people, I love studying like society and our emotions and just everything. I've always had this thought because like I grew up working so hard at my law firm and like a lot of what I did was my career and it was really hard to find time for like love or my social life or my family. And I've always seen like women, again, another like, I wouldn't say I'm like a super feminist, but maybe I am because I feel like all my issues in my books are kind of related to that. But I've seen so many women feel like we have to choose, right? And so I wanted to write a story. It's, I would say Taylor Swift inspired, but not just Taylor, also Liani inspired, of like women, strong women, successful women that have to kind of pick career versus like love and family. And I really wanted to do something like to bridge the gap between book 3 for my readers. And so I wanted to do like a fun little like Taylor Swift inspired. It's almost, I would say it's still sort of a thriller, but it's almost more of like a romantic-y thriller. And so it's a little different from what you guys have seen, like readers have seen me write. It's not different from what I've seen me write because I also have a romantic fantasy trilogy that I'm looking to put out at some point. But I kind of wanted to test the waters with this and I wanted something really fun for Halloween. So this is coming out soon for my readers and I love the cover. It's so cute and like it's a collectible cover. And then I have Spring Break, which is the 3rd book in the, so there's going to be 4 books in the Ski Weekend universe. So Ski Weekend, Summer Rental, Spring Break, and then the 4th one, I'm not totally sure yet. I know it's going to be Halloween and fall. It has to be fall because they're all seasons. But Spring Break is going to be my ode to the Lost Boys. So I love Lost Boys. I love vampires. But as much as I love like Twilight and all the like the fun, like sexy vampires, I wanted to do like a scary vampire, like a more traditional, like scary vampire. And there's gonna be a theme to that one too. There's another issue that I really want to explore. I'm a very big animal rights person. Like I did a ton of volunteering, lobbying for animal rights organizations. I worked for the Humane Society as a volunteer and I did pro bono for them. So I feel super passionately about animal rights issues. And so the 3rd book is going to explore that in a vampire.
Oh, fun.
So I hope, you know, it's going to be thriller horror, but it's going to be more of like a adventure. Like I would say almost like a Jurassic Park kind of a thing where it's like it's scary, but it's more like action adventure and fun. Because I'm trying to all the tropes, like Ski Weekend was man versus nature, and then Summer Rental is the slasher, and then I want to do like a really fun like action adventure horror thriller. Or like Prey or Predator, something like that. Or Aliens is another great example. Something where it's like you're on the seat of your edge of your seat.
Yeah.
It's a lot of like, and she's gonna be the, I've already started drafting her. This is gonna be my first like kick-ass, like badass heroine that can like, you know, arm a gun and, you know, drill holes and like a survivalist kind of a girl. So I'm very excited.
That is so fun. Well, okay. Well, I love that this is a world. Okay, so they're all part of the same world.
Yes.
Makes perfect sense now. I absolutely love that. Okay, so of course we're just so thrilled to have this chat with you today. This was so fun. I learned so much from you. I love speaking to women. I love speaking to writers, especially, but females who have done other things in their lives are just so inspiring to me because that just reiterates like, oh, you're totally doing it. You know what I mean? Too. And it just
I feel the same about about you guys too. Like, I love that you
motivated.
guys are so into the book thing and adapting books. And I love that. I feel like we have so much in common. And hopefully, even off the podcast, we'll continue talking too, because
Absolutely.
I love women in this space.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us on Off the Shelf. And everyone, we will see you next time. Bye.